Hello and welcome to Velosio Viewpoint Live, where we come to you every other week to discuss all things cloud, digital transformation, ERP, CRM, IT security, and so much more to really help your business go from what is to what is possible. Now, before I get into today's session, which I'm super excited about this conversation, I want to make sure that whether you are on LinkedIn or YouTube, that you are hitting that subscribe or follow button so that you don't miss any of the content that we have going out, whether it is a free guide that's going to help you in your business, whether it is a live session like this or a webinar. I just want to make sure you have access to all of the goods. So with that said, my name is Jessica Rodriguez. I am the marketing performance manager here at Velosio, and I have a very special guest with me, the founder of Velosio, Joe Longo. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, thank you, Jessica. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Yes, and as I was looking at this topic, all I kept thinking is when it comes to annual planning, we are, getting close to the halfway mark here in 2025 as far as us being live today. And I bet some people's plans have changed. I bet there has been a lot of instability. There's a lot of change, right?
For sure. Nothing ever goes as planned, right? We know that.
No, exactly. And that's why I think this is such a great time to have this conversation where it's like, okay, so how do we handle this? And how do we make plans that actually can withstand there being change, right? And that being inevitable for any organization. So I'd like to start with, what do you see as the typical process for planning in businesses?
Yeah, so there's a couple key elements to it, and really the key is that annual planning can lead to operational success, right? So I really find that you can't have one without the other, and being successful with whatever your organization does, and having a thriving organization effectively lies with executing a plan on an annual basis and even a long-term basis. And I've really found this throughout my career. When we started Velosio, we had under 10 individuals. Now we're well over 500, right? And the names have changed over the years, so on and so forth. But one of the key elements that I would say is that has really helped us to navigate an industry that is constantly changing over the last few decades is that we have a plan. And we go through a planning process, and having the process and having a plan are key, because when things change, as they inevitably do, right, then you can go back and you can course correct. So that, having a plan is key. And I do that. I sit on a number of boards nowadays, and sometimes I'm running the planning process. Sometimes I'm participating in it, but having a planning process is really critical. It doesn't have to be the best process, right? So some companies, organizations, I see they really have a detailed planning process. Others are quite simple. I don't know that there's a right or wrong. I would say a B-level process that's executed at an A-level is better than having a really detailed process that isn't executed. So I kind of look at it and say there's kind of 4 key steps that I like to see in a planning process. First is assessing the current situation, the current operations. And Jessica, as you said, we're kind of like in the midpoint of the year. We typically see that kicking off in the beginning of Q3. As the process continues, the next step is really setting operational objectives, right? What are the goals for the upcoming year that we want to achieve? The next step of really the 4 kind of key areas, the third one is developing a detailed plan of attack to achieve those objectives. Okay. And then the final piece is aligning all the resources within the company and the organization to achieve the plan. And, what I've seen is, again, without a plan in today's chaotic business environment, when we're dealing with things changing so fast and the media is now acting in sound bites and tweets, you need a plan and a vision to say, all right, am I on course or not? And interesting enough, what I've seen studies that say 50% of businesses operate without a planning process at all. They may have a budget, but they really don't have a detailed plan. And that, at the end of the day, that's, in my opinion, a problem, because why does having a planning process and a plan matter? What I've seen is numerous things. I've seen it allows a company to set a direction for itself, and it allows you to connect all the team members throughout the entity to a common purpose. Okay, so what is it we're trying to achieve, and how are we going to get there? And that framework of setting the objectives and the goals to get there, from the top all the way down through the organization, and as we'll talk about, kind of coming back up, really doing that in a transparent manner drives communication, it drives accountability, and it drives kind of camaraderie to achieve the plan. Okay, so to me, if you don't have a plan, how do you ever know if you're going to get to where you want to get to? Right? You have to have some objectives and a detailed plan to get there. Otherwise, you kind of get what you plan for, which is who knows. So it's really critical to have that in order to kind of execute. Otherwise, you're just leaving it up to luck, in my opinion. So.
Yes. And I could see where that stress or chaos, whatever word you want to use, can really come in, where if employees, leadership, like nobody knows where it is that we're heading. So then everyone's kind of chasing whatever's going on. Like you said, headlines, different things. And now there's just, you're really going nowhere. Everyone's going in a different direction.
And you don't know where you're going, right? I always use the analogy of, okay, we're really doing great climbing the ladder of success, and you get to the top and it's on the wrong wall, right? Because you never look back and said, where am I going? So you're absolutely right. It's hard to stay focused in today's environment, and having a plan allows you to do that. So.
And where would you say that data fits in to this conversation, and really helping leaders to make better decisions as they are implementing the plan that they have set out, or maybe at the beginning, right? Like setting that plan too. Yeah,
I would. So I would say, data is critical to everything we do. And, here, let me come back to that. Let me tell you kind of some components to the planning, the key steps, and then we'll relate to how the data kind of drives into those steps.
Perfect.
So, I mentioned the 4 steps at a high level. Let me punch down a little bit, and we'll talk about some of the things in those steps and how data drives them. So the first step I mentioned was assessing your current situation, your current operations, right? And it is critically important to gather actionable data for at this point in the planning process, right? It gives you information to make decisions on and set goals and objectives. It gets stakeholder buy-in. And it's really key to assessing where you are in that first step of assessing where you are, which typically I would say starts in, as I mentioned, the beginning of Q3. So like that July, August timeframe, right? So in that step, we always talk about a company reaffirming its mission, vision, and values at the ownership level and down throughout the organization. We talk about gathering data from customers, so doing customer surveys and understanding where we're doing well or not doing well with customers. We always like to see companies do a net promoter score, right? So that's a data element as well. And then we do the same thing with team members, and it suggests the same that any company do, is really survey your team members and understand where they're at, right? Is their engagement with the company good or bad or improving or going downward? Are they happy with things like benefits and compensation and work remote or not remote? All those sort of things, right, are very data driven. And getting that feedback in this first step is critical. Another element we talk about there is we really ask to do a SWOT, okay? And a SWOT is going into the organization to gather data around what's a strength, a weakness, an opportunity, or a threat. And if you do that at different levels and different departments and divisions, you get to see those things from different viewpoints. All of that data that's gathered in that first step is critical, because ultimately we look at that and say, all right, are we achieving our scorecard from the prior year? And use that data to say, where are we missing? Where are we hitting? Where do we want to add investment next year, or where do we need to kind of change things? So that all happens in that first step of the planning process, where you assess the current operations. The next step I mentioned was setting operational goals, and in this case, what we like to do is it's an acronym. I'm sure you've heard of it out there. It's called setting SMART goals, right? Mm-hmm. Goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Okay. So we use the information and the data that we gathered in the first step to say, what are the new objectives coming into the current year, to set new key performance indicators or set new initiatives for the year. I'm a big fan of what's called the balanced scorecard, and I think that was created a couple decades ago by some professors at Harvard, Kaplan and Norton, I believe. And in that approach, you set a scorecard for the company, and you say, what are our financial goals? What are our client and customer goals? What are our operational goals? And what are our people goals, right? And in that, you have improvement initiatives and you have KPIs. And the KPIs should all be data-driven, right? We want to improve this. We want margin to increase, or we want our employee net promoter score to increase. Those are, important things that you look for in that step. That process allows you to kind of create a unified path forward for the team members. Now, the next step that I mentioned there, developing a detailed plan, is really where you take these these objectives. And so I said there were 4 categories, right? Financial, customer, operational, and people. And generally, we like to recommend there's 2 or 3 kind of objectives under each of those categories. So in any given year, we might have 8 to 12 kind of key initiative objectives that we're running throughout the company across, those categories. But we talked about a detailed plan. Well, the objectives are there, but then you really need to say, how am I going to achieve those? So let's take, I would like to increase, inventory turns, or customer satisfaction, or speed to ship orders, right? These are all things that need an actionable plan behind them, so that objective can be achieved. And those plans take data, right? It takes, you need to know where you're at, you need to know where you want to get to, and you want to lay out the steps to get there. So that developing the detailed plan is really the bridge between how am I going to work to achieve the objective. And in doing so, you're able to talk to different parts of the company and say, all right, here's how we want to do it, right? So, for example, right, you deal with this all the time. We have an objective maybe to increase revenue, right? Every company wants to do that. Well, when you say that, it sounds pretty simple, but the net new sales team calls marketing and says, hey, we got to drive more leads for net new sales. The existing customer team says, no, I need some newsletters and some events to talk to my current customers. And the engineering team says, hey, I need to hire developers to write some software that's going to attract new customers. So all of that increases revenue, but unless you really say, what's the plan and what am I measuring? You could have 3 different parts of a company misalign going after something that's quite different. So that's that kind of third step. What's the detailed plan? And then the last thing is really aligning the resources. Do I have enough team members to do this? Do I have the right systems? And this is where we see pretty frequently that will come back, or a company will come back and say, hey, I know I need to do this, but I don't even have the base level data to say, how am I going to improve it and measure it? Because you really can't improve what you can't measure. No. So that's another element that, you need data to execute on. So those 4 steps, every one of them has a data element to it for sure.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I also like the overarching theme of specificity on it as well, where it's not just increased revenue. It's like, okay, by how much? Or customer satisfaction. How much are we aiming towards? Otherwise, I don't know, maybe one did it. Like we did $1 more. We did it, you know?
Exactly. And look, sometimes it's easy to increase, if you're at a 50th percentile to get to the 60th. But if you're at the 90th percentile, it's real hard to get to the 95th percentile. So data is really critical in the process and the measurement, right? So where are we quarter to date, year to date, and achieving those things? If the key point there is what do you measure, right? So and do we have the data to measure it? And then two, what is the target, right? So like one, what do we want to measure, and what are the right applicable targets are two different things. They're both related to data, right? Mm-hmm. But they're critical to understand.
Yes, and that just makes it easier to have that conversation, like you said, whether it's certain resources you have all of that data to back it up of here's exactly why maybe this thing isn't working, or we're not leveraging this thing over here enough. Look at what this is showing.
Exactly. We always find with the best projects we have at Velosio with our clients are ones that align to providing systems that give them actionable data, especially when that data is really critical for them achieving their strategic goals. Okay. And when we started the business a long time ago, I don't want to date myself, the key was we were trying to put in systems that allowed people to process transactions faster. Okay. Whether it was closing your books or shipping inventory or tracking project hours, whatever that was, right? We were bringing technology to do things that weren't done with technology, or sometimes done manually or in Excel in the past. But over the past 10 years for sure, what has happened is all that stuff, the processing of transactions is just kind of table stakes. Any system will do that. Where we provide the most value and really love working with our clients is to say, hey, we can do all that stuff. We can process the transactions. We deal with a lot of Microsoft systems and they're top notch, but setting them up to track the right data and showing our clients how to get that data is really valuable to them. And it's kind of fun for us to work with, right? Because then we're really bringing the value to say, they have a planning process and they have whatever, 50, 20, 10 things that they're focused on. And our systems can drive that by showing the data, and are they increasing or decreasing? Are they achieving it? That's really fun for both us and our clients. And that's absolutely the value in systems nowadays, right? Because anybody can get systems that write checks or move inventory around or create shipping documents. That's table stakes. But really having actionable data, that's critical. I'm sure you're reading a lot about AI now, right? So AI works better with more data. So if a company has more data that they're tracking, AI becomes exponentially more effective analyzing that data and showing outliers or using it. So data's driving everything. And if you link data to achieving the business objectives, then you're really talking about progress.
Exactly. And that's when you make your year plan or your annual plan a lot easier to achieve, to navigate, to troubleshoot, whatever you need to do. Now you have the data to support it throughout the year.
Absolutely. And then hopefully the systems, right? Whether it's putting in some additional systems, a CRM system, or updating ERP or utilizing like Microsoft Copilot, utilizing it to achieve your objectives is a worthwhile cause. Using AI just for the sake of using AI, it's kind of neat. You can say you're trendy, but the reality is you want to move the business forward. And if you can use it to achieve business objectives, fantastic.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for joining me today. This was great. And I think there's a lot of takeaways as far as really how to think about your planning and how to structure it in a way that's actually going to serve your goals, right? And what the company needs.
Absolutely. Well, it was a pleasure speaking with you today.
Yes, I am going to add Joe's contact info right at the bottom here of LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with him. And if you want to learn more about how we can support the plans you have for your organization, visit us over at velosio.com. We have a ton of incredible content and resources and easy ways to be able to get in touch so that we can help you throughout this year. So with that, we're going to say goodbye, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.
Have a great day. Thank you.